For years, a billionaire believed his only son, born with autism, paralysis, and other severe conditions, would never speak, move, or connect with the world. He tried everything, doctors, therapies, specialists, but nothing worked. Then a new maid was hired. She was quiet, gentle, and had no medical training. But what she discovered inside that silent mansion changed everything. Hidden behind the child's silence was a heartbreaking truth and a miracle waiting to happen. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Thomas Harrington had once lived for meetings, flights, and deals, but now his days began and ended in the same quiet room. On a bed surrounded by machines lay his 6-year-old son, Daniel. Daniel had autism, paralysis, Down syndrome, and a long list of diagnoses that made specialists shake their heads. He didn't talk, didn't sit up on his own, barely moved. His eyes stared past people as if the world were happening behind glass. Doctors called him non-responsive. To Thomas, he was still his boy. Every morning, Thomas checked Daniel's monitors, adjusted his pillows, and spoke to him as if he could answer. The boy was fed through a tube, cleaned, dressed, and moved into a reclined wheelchair by nurses who moved with the calm efficiency of people used to long, difficult cases. After that came the schedule: physical therapy, speech sessions, sensory exercises, neurological evaluations. Specialists from several countries had come and gone through the Harrington mansion, trailing expensive devices and complicated theories. None of it made any visible difference. Daniel's body stayed slack, his voice silent. Still, Thomas refused to see his son as empty. At night, when the therapists had left and the machines hummed softly, he sat by the bed and talked. He told Daniel about his late wife, Rachel, about the ocean, about the city they used to walk through together. He played videos of Rachel laughing and singing, hoping something in Daniel would recognize her. The boy never blinked differently, never turned his head, never grabbed his father's hand on command. Yet Thomas kept talking. He believed, without proof, that his son heard him. The rest of the world slowly fell away. Friends stopped visiting. Business partners handled deals through lawyers. The huge mansion turned into a quiet island of routine and medical equipment. Staff moved like shadows, careful and professional. No one expected change. They had all accepted the same story. Daniel would remain like this forever. Then Sarah Martinez arrived. She came with a small suitcase and a grief of her own. Months earlier, she had lost her newborn daughter and had been drifting since, working wherever she could, trying to keep her mind busy. The job at the Harrington mansion sounded simple enough: cleaning, organizing, keeping the house in order. On her first day, she noticed how spotless everything was and how lifeless it felt. No laughter, no music, only low voices and the beeping of monitors. Thomas greeted her briefly, explained the rules, and mentioned his son. "He doesn't respond," he said, not unkindly, just tired. "Don't expect him to." Sarah nodded. She didn't promise anything. She wasn't there to fix anyone. She only wanted a place where her hands could stay busy and her heart could, maybe, quiet down. The first time she saw Daniel, he was lying in a recliner near a window, his head supported by cushions, his gaze unfocused. A nurse adjusted his feeding tube while talking softly to him out of habit. When the nurse left, Sarah lingered in the doorway. She didn't step forward, didn't try to talk loudly or wave. She simply stood there and watched for a moment, then went back to her cleaning. Over the next days, she found herself assigned more and more often to the rooms near Daniel. She dusted shelves while therapists worked, learning the rhythm of the house. She heard medical terms she didn't understand and watched Thomas stand through every session, his eyes fixed on his son. When the professionals left, Sarah sometimes stayed behind, folding blankets or straightening books while Daniel sat in his chair. She began to speak to him in a natural way, the way she had once spoken to her own baby when no one else was listening. She told him what she was doing, mentioned the weather, described the smell of the soup she was cooking in the kitchen. She never raised her voice or tried to force eye contact. If he looked away, she let him. Her presence was simple and quiet. The mansion had rooms even staff rarely used. One afternoon, while cleaning the upper floor, Sarah noticed a narrow hallway she hadn't seen before. At the end was a half-open door leading into a storage space filled with covered furniture and boxes. In the corner stood a tall cabinet with faded labels. She felt a strange pull toward it, then an equally strong hesitation. Something in her chest tightened. Without touching anything, she stepped back and closed the door. That hallway stayed in the back of her mind like an unanswered question. Meanwhile, tiny changes started to appear around Daniel. One day, when she put a soft cloth in his hand, his fingers closed for a second before slipping open. Another day, while she wound a small music box and its gentle tune played, his eyelids fluttered more than usual. Sarah didn't gasp or call the others. She simply noticed. The next time she chose the same cloth, the same song. Patterns mattered. She had learned from her own short time as a mother. She also noticed how Daniel reacted when no one expected him to. During therapies, when voices were firm and instructions repeated, he seemed even more distant. But in ordinary moments, sunlight warming his legs, the breeze from an open window, the quiet clink of dishes in another room, his breathing changed. His eyes sometimes shifted. Sarah started opening curtains wider, letting fresh air in, turning off background machines when they weren't needed. Slowly she began moving his chair to new places. The back porch, where he could feel the wind. The hallway near the kitchen, where smells floated by. The laundry room, where she spent long stretches of time folding clothes. There, with the washing machine humming and piles of towels around them, the silence felt less heavy. She would hand him a freshly dried towel, let him rest his fingers on the warm fabric, and talk about nothing important. He never answered. But he was there. One ordinary afternoon in that laundry room, everything shifted. The machine was spinning. Clothes were stacked in messy piles. Sarah was moving quickly, sorting, folding, stacking. Daniel sat nearby in his chair, facing her. Without thinking, as she straightened up from picking a sock off the floor, she made a silly face, a habit left over from the days she had tried to make her baby laugh during diaper changes. Her eyes widened, her tongue stuck out for a second, a reflex more than a conscious act. From the chair came a sound, soft, breathy, but unmistakably a laugh. Sarah froze, thinking she had imagined it. Then she looked at Daniel. His lips were curved, his cheeks strained in the smallest of smiles. It wasn't a random twitch. It was a response. She didn't scream for the others. She didn't burst into tears. She simply let a slow smile appear on her own face and continued folding, now speaking a little more warmly, as if they shared a secret. She only realized how long she'd been talking when the laundry room door opened. Thomas stood in the doorway, tie loosened, briefcase still in hand. He had followed a faint sound of laughter he couldn't quite believe he heard. His eyes went from Sarah to Daniel. The boy's head was tilted slightly toward the open washing machine door, his mouth still holding the ghost of a smile. "He's laughing," Thomas said, as if he were afraid the words might scare the moment away. "Yes," Sarah answered quietly. "He is." Thomas moved closer and knelt beside the chair. Daniel didn't turn away. That alone was new. Thomas stayed there, not asking for more, just absorbing what he was seeing. For the first time in years, the hope he had carried like a secret finally had something to cling to. In the days that followed, Sarah kept everything as normal as possible. Same laundry room, same calm tone, same lack of pressure. Daniel's responses came in small pieces. A quick grin when she bumped her hip against a cabinet and pretended it hurt. A breathy sound when she placed a towel on his head like a hat. a long blink that seemed almost like an eye roll when she joked about putting him in the machine to wash his socks. Each time, she treated it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Thomas started drifting toward whichever room they were in, drawn by the feeling that something was finally moving. He didn't call the neurologist right away. For the first time, he wanted to understand his son without a clinical explanation getting in the way. Then, one afternoon, as Sarah handed Daniel a small towel to hold, his hand lifted in a slow, deliberate motion. He pointed, not perfectly, but clearly toward a pile of folded towels on the table. Sarah crouched next to him. "What is it?" she asked softly. His lips moved. At first, she thought it was just another breath. Then she heard it. Towel. It was barely more than a whisper, the consonants soft, the vowels blurred, but the intent was unmistakable. A word, a choice. Her heart pounded, but on the outside she stayed steady. "Yes," she said, looking where he had pointed. "Towel." She said it once, warmly, and then went back to folding like nothing world-shattering had happened. He had spoken. He needed space to know it was safe to do it again. Thomas, walking down the hall, heard the faint sound of a voice that wasn't Sarah's. He stopped, then moved quickly toward the laundry room. When he stepped inside, Sarah and Daniel were calm. Nothing looked different, but the air felt charged. "Everything okay?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "He said something," she replied. Her voice was low. Thomas's face changed. "What did he say?" "He said towel and pointed right at them." Thomas sank down in front of his son. "You said towel?" he asked, voice shaking. Daniel didn't repeat it. He just looked at his father, eyes steady, and for Thomas that was enough. He reached out and held his son's hand, not as a test, but as a simple connection. No one rushed to get a camera. No one screamed down the hall. They let the moment be small, knowing how big it really was. A few days later, while cleaning the office Thomas rarely used now, Sarah found a locked desk drawer with a tiny keyhole. Most drawers opened easily, filled with old papers and company reports. This one resisted. Taped under a box labeled MISC, she found a small, rusted key. Curiosity and a strange unease pushed her to try it. Inside the drawer lay a thick folder stamped with Daniel's name. At first glance, they looked like ordinary medical files, evaluation dates, physician signatures, therapy plans. But as she read further, the language shifted. Phrases like behavioral suppression, emotional containment, and response inhibition repeated across pages. There were notes on using high doses of sedating medications, sessions of neutral room isolation, where Daniel had been left alone for long stretches, and instructions for physical restraints during non-compliant episodes. Sarah felt sick. These weren't just treatments. They were methods designed to control, quiet, and shut down. At the bottom of many reports, one name kept appearing. Dr. Howard Levin, chief neurologist. She typed his name into her phone. Complaints appeared immediately, posts from parents, articles about controversial methods, references to investigations that never quite went anywhere. Families spoke about children who had come back from his program more distant than before, more silent, more afraid. She looked up from the screen and pictured Daniel the first day she saw him, not just still, but shut down. How much of that had been his condition, and how much had been what had been done to him? She spent the rest of that day moving through the house on autopilot, the weight of what she had learned pressing on her chest. That night, after checking that Daniel was settled and the staff had retreated, she slipped back into the office with the folder and her printed notes. She invited Thomas to sit. At first, she simply opened the folder and slid it across the desk. "These are Daniel's old reports," she said. "I found them in a locked drawer." Thomas frowned and put on his glasses. As he read, Sarah pointed out sections, translating the clinical terms gently. The isolation, the restraints, the off-label drugs. Then she laid down the pages she had printed about Dr. Levin, other families' stories, threads from support groups, mentions in legal documents. Thomas's face drained of color. His hands tightened on the folder. For a long time, he said nothing. "I trusted him," he finally whispered. "Everyone said he was the best. I signed all of this." He stared at the papers as if they might burn. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Sarah didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She knew he needed more than comfort. He needed a way forward. "Daniel is here," she said quietly. He laughed. He said, "Towel. Whatever happened, he's still coming back. And now you know this. You can decide what to do next." Thomas looked up, eyes red. "What can we do?" "Tell the truth," she answered. "Not just for Daniel, for all the other kids." The next weeks were divided in two worlds. In one, Thomas and Sarah built a case. They gathered every report linked to Dr. Levin, contacted lawyers who specialized in medical abuse, and reached out to families who had left comments online. Some didn't respond. Others sent long emails filled with pain. A journalist known for investigating health scandals agreed to listen. In the other world, inside the mansion, life with Daniel continued calmly, deliberately free from pressure. As the legal file grew, so did Daniel's quiet progress. New words appeared, always small, always unexpected. Cup, when he wanted a drink. Light, as he stared at the ceiling. More, when music stopped. Sarah wrote them down in a little notebook. The dates, the context. Thomas read it every night like a diary of miracles. Therapists who still came to the house were instructed to change their approach, less forcing, more following Daniel's lead. Sessions moved to the porch, to the garden, to the laundry room. Thomas attended not as a desperate client, but as a father guarding his son. The journalist's report eventually went public. It detailed Dr. Levin's methods, the complaints, the pattern of silenced families, and Daniel's story as the case that finally broke everything open. Thomas and Sarah had agreed to appear, but kept the focus on the system rather than themselves. The reaction was immediate. Investigations were reopened. Dr. Levin's license was suspended. Other parents came forward. For the first time, the harm hidden behind clinical language was named in front of everyone. Inside the mansion, no one celebrated loudly. They watched the news with the volume low while Daniel drew at the coffee table. Justice, they knew, was only just beginning, and it would not erase the past. But it mattered. Life settled into a new rhythm. Rooms that had been dedicated to therapy equipment were slowly turned into more ordinary spaces. A small art corner for Daniel, a cozy reading nook where Thomas and Sarah could sit while he played nearby. Daniel still had limitations. He still needed help to move around, still spoke few words, still spent long stretches in silence. But now, the silence felt different. It wasn't forced. It wasn't drugged. It belonged to him. One afternoon, Sarah was tidying the living room while Daniel flipped through a heavy book of paintings on the floor. As she picked up a thinner book from under the couch and opened it to see if any pages were damaged, something slipped out, an old envelope, yellowed with time. It landed at Daniel's feet. He picked it up clumsily and turned it over with both hands. "Found," he said, his voice quiet but clear. He held it out toward her. Sarah took the envelope and saw the handwriting on the front. A name she recognized from pictures and whispered stories. Rachel. At that moment, Thomas walked in, saw the envelope, and stopped mid-step. "That's her handwriting," he said, barely audible. They sat down together on the couch. Daniel climbed up between them with some help, still holding the letter until Sarah gently took it back. She opened it with care, the paper delicate from years of waiting. Then she began to read aloud. Rachel's words were simple. She wrote about being afraid and hopeful at the same time, about loving a child she knew would face challenges she couldn't predict. She wrote to Thomas, asking him not to let guilt swallow him whole if things went wrong, not to turn their home into a prison of routines. She wrote to their son, imagining he might hear the letter one day, telling him he was wanted, that he was more than any diagnosis, that she hoped someone gentle would always be by his side if she couldn't be there. When Sarah finished, the room stayed quiet. Daniel looked from one adult to the other, then down at the page in her hands. Thomas pressed his palms together under his chin, eyes closed, absorbing every sentence as if it had just been spoken. Sarah folded the letter again and placed it on Daniel's lap. "Yours," she said, "from your mum." Later that day, Daniel asked for tape and pointed at the hallway wall. With Sarah's help, he pressed a drawing there. 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one medium, one small. Underneath, he signed his name in uneven letters. When Thomas joined them in the hall, Daniel pointed at the drawing, then at each of them. "Us," he said. Just one word, but this time strong, sure, proud. No machines, no charts, no experts could capture what that word meant. A boy once buried under silence had found his voice. A father who had lost himself in guilt had chosen to act. A maid who arrived with her own broken heart had uncovered the truth everyone else had missed, and with it, the chance for all of them to finally become what they already were, a family.